welcome everyone. A new episode of Money Means Business. The lion's share of this episode is going to be totally dedicated to the new government strategy regarding the coming period, as in front of the House of Representatives, the Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli introduced or unveiled the new government program outlining the comprehensive strategy to address the crucial challenges and changes facing Egypt and maybe facing the global economy in general, and we are suffering the very same negative impact as the other states in the whole world. And here, by the way, I'm not talking only about the developing countries. Developed and developed countries are suffering of the same crises in different manners, of course. We are going to discuss that and to discuss the most important challenges we are facing with our dear guest live here in the studio. Also, we are going to shed more light on the Egyptian participation in the 6th mid-year coordination meeting of the African Union in Ghana, as on behalf of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli arrived in Accra to participate in the EU meetings, in addition to our top diplomat Badr Abdel Ati, as he held a number of meetings, whether with EU top executives or with his counterparts from different African states. We are going to have a rich episode, and we are going to start immediately right after this, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Before we start, let me first welcome my dear guest live here in the studio, Dr. Ahmed El-Laythi Nasif, international consultant in strategic management and a writer. Thank you very much for being with us, sir.
Thank you for having me.
And let's start immediately. As I said, we are going to take a quick look at the Egyptian participation in the 6th year coordination meeting of the African Union in Ghana capital in Accra. On behalf of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli arrived earlier in Accra as he is going to represent Egypt in this important meeting. And I've just received this piece of news. Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli met with Ngwam Kilimini, the Secretary General of the African Free Trade Treaty, and they agreed on the importance of the treaty and also of the efforts which should be exerted by all African states to achieve the goals of the African Free Trade Treaty. Before going into details, how do you see the importance of activating this free trade treaty inside Africa and its importance to meet the aspirations of the African peoples?
Well, to start with, we need to recognize that Africa is a very large market. Africa is a continent with 54 countries. There is about 1.4 billion people living in these countries. So basically they need to consume just about everything that we can produce or grow or trade in Egypt. So it's a huge market. And at the same time we need to recognize that it is highly underdeveloped. The total GDP of Africa is hardly 1/6 of that of China. Despite that almost the similar population. So it has a huge opportunity to grow. At the same time, unfortunately, most of Africa is not, the industry is very young, very underdeveloped and very superficial. Most of the exports and the natural resources that Africa has are being exported in their raw format, which means that they are being exported at a very, very low price and then, interestingly enough, are re-imported once more, manufactured with a bit of value added, little value added, at 3, 4, 5 times the price that they were exported at in the first place. So huge area for development in the continent, and a huge opportunity for the Egyptian economy to play a key role in that development. From that, I think it's very clear that the right thing to do is to first encourage the bilateral trade between the African countries. And it reminds me, actually, that reminds me at the time when I used to head one of the key multinationals, I always had a discussion that it's very difficult. I was heading North Africa at the time. It was very difficult to import a product or to sell a product that's being produced by somebody who makes 16 to 20 euros per hour to somebody who makes 30 euros per month.
Oh.
So it's
what a difference.
Yes.
This is such a huge gap.
It is, and unfortunately it's very real.
Okay.
So what happens is that the gap between the income in Africa and in Europe is huge, and there isn't anything to stop Africa but the will of its people to be able to evolve and develop, to at least close part of that gap. So
Great.
Huge opportunity for everybody in the continent and definitely for the Egyptian economy.
Sir, but of course I do agree with what you have said, but how to implement that on the ground? I mean in deeds, not in words, because for example there are here some topics which were discussed in this meeting when the Secretary General of the Free Trade Treaty said to Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli that via implementing or activating the treaty, there should be efforts exerted on the ground, for example, to manufacture cars, vehicles, the spare parts, and also the pharmaceutical studies. And he mentioned those as examples of the implementations of this treaty, which can be role models for other fields or other industries to come. how this can be implemented via using the resources, via exchanging the experts or calibers, what?
The first and the most important thing is the will to implement the treaty. It sounds too simplistic, but it is not actually. Without mentioning the country, I used to live in one of the countries in the continent, and I used to see that the treaty was signed, but there was local laws that were introduced basically to block the treaty completely. So, for example, the reduction of duties, fine. It was signed just because of the diplomacy and to look good in front of everybody. It was signed, and then immediately, before it could take place and happen, there were local laws issued basically reinstituting everything that was abolished, or all the benefits that were abolished by the treaty. Whereas there was a bilateral treaty with another European country that gave much more benefit to this European country than the adjacent countries in the continent. So if there is no will, political will, to really implement these treaties, they will never happen. There will be very nice statements and procedure written on a piece of paper, but they will never see the light in reality. And I think this is the most important.
So if there is the political will, and we do have even some incentives from the West, because I do remember well, in the last G7 meeting, Giorgia Meloni of Italy said that it's a must now to invest in Africa, and it's a must to stop the illegal migration. And after that, we had the EU-Egypt joint conference or investment summit, if I may call it this way. In the very same time, there was another important agreement which took place between Italy and Algeria to reclaim about 500,000 acres or such stuff, I mean. So how to benefit from that? Because I think the world should have learned the lesson from the COVID-19, the lockdown, now the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, all the crises which the whole world are suffering from. True? Or still, a lot of other crises should happen before we really learn the lessons?
First of all, I think the Egyptian-EU agreement, that was a very special thing to appreciate the President Sisi and the efforts and his leadership. And that's almost one-to-one, if I'm not mistaken. I think since 1952, I do not remember Egypt hosting so many ministers at the same time and signing such an agreement. So I think that's a particular appreciation or sign of appreciation to President Sisi and his leadership to the country, and how Egypt has played a pivotal role in all the conflicts around us. To answer your earlier question, I really don't think so. I mean, again, without mentioning any names. In the African continent, we have the country that is the highest producer of gold in the world. There is a European country, again, I will not mention the name, that has almost 30 times more gold than this country, whereas it has 0 mines of gold. This summarizes the whole story. The natural resources that are available in the continent are being very much exported and used in the West. Will there reciprocity in the investment to the continent? Actually, I don't see it. The best example that we could look at or could see very close, it was in Sharm el-Sheikh last year when we had the
COP27?
COP27, and we've seen that most of the pollution and the global warming issues that we have are coming from the industrial countries. And the African countries are not in an economic status that allows them to be able to take the actions required to protect themselves from the global warming. And Egypt played a very, very major role to try to convince the other side that they need to contribute what has been agreed in Glasgow a year before.
Since the Kyoto Protocol even before.
And Paris Agreement even, if you want to go back. And it didn't happen. So again, I think the Africans need to hold hands. Again, I don't want it to sound like a cliche, but they have to depend on themselves if they really want to move further. I would be very surprised to see, let's say, a competitive economy that will come and help the African economy in order to prosper, rather than keeping the prosperity for themselves. It goes against the logic of things. So Africa has to walk on its own feet, type of thing.
But they are going to suffer illegal migration. They are going to find thousands of people on their shores. You are going to find Lampedusa, for example, filled with those who are sinking off their shores, centers of asylum seekers, and of course it's going to raise the rate of terrorism because those who can be brainwashed, they are going to be brainwashed because of poverty, of lack of even food, of job opportunities and stuff like that. So it's going to continue with this kind of fight between the northern and the southern sides of the Mediterranean.
True, but so what? At the end of the day, it's a number game. This is emotionally moving, but fine. I mean, politics and economics do not run on emotions. They run on numbers. Okay, there will be a cost associated with everything that you rightly said, but how does this compare to the other benefit? It's a cost-benefit analysis at the end of the day that comes to Europe from the south. Yes, there is a little bit of inconveniences. How big is Lampedusa versus the surface of Europe? It's almost negligible. You wouldn't even be 0.01%. Okay, yes, there will be.
I would just give an example. Sir.
I understand.
And I would just give an example because this is exactly what was said by Giorgia Meloni in the G7, and it was already followed by agreements whether in Algeria or with us here in Egypt. But you've kindly mentioned that Egypt, or the EU-Egypt investment summit was
that's a separate thing. That's a separate thing.
Of course, okay, let's return back to the participation of Egypt into the 6th mid-year coordination meeting, and to speak a little bit about other sidelines diplomacy, as our top diplomat, Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati, held a number of meetings with Mauritanian, Senegalese, Congolese, Tanzanian counterparts, in addition to AU Commissioner Moussa Faki. And he agreed with all that efforts should be exerted to achieve peace first, because simply no investment and no economic development can be achieved without peace, restoring peace, stability, and unifying efforts together. And with his counterpart from Tanzania in specific, they talked about the Julius Nyerere Dam as a mega project implemented by Egyptian companies as a role model for how the African cooperation can end with such a mega project. How do you see this, an example first, and how do you see the importance of the sidelines diplomacy?
There is something called the devil and angel cake, which is a cake that's half cream, half chocolate. So obviously half is white, the other half is black. That's not very different from the situation that Egypt has done with Tanzania, or the support that we have supported our brothers and sisters in Tanzania with, when we help them with the Egyptian know-how to build a key dam over the river to help them generate electricity and create value basically for the country. If we look at the other side, unfortunately, the flip side of that story is the story of the Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia, where Ethiopia continues after negotiating for almost, I think, more than 10 years with the Egyptian government and with the Sudanese at the time when the state was still standing. And they still went and uniquely took decisions that could actually harm Egypt and could harm Sudan without adding any benefit to them. So these are two black and white examples, if you want.
Amen to that.
And both of them are almost on similar projects for similar objectives, but there are different ways to do the same thing. So unfortunately, one country chose cooperation and helping and interchanging and open diplomacy. Another one took a very stiff and rough path, which risk that in the end will fire back.
And this is to say that simply Egypt in deeds, not in words, is not against the development of any country. And simply we can help, we can give a hand by all means. Also, another important meeting which was made by Foreign Minister Abdel Ati, meeting with a group of Guinean businessmen in the fields of construction, pharmacy, shipping, automotive, energy, food products, and agricultural projects. And here I mentioned this in specific because of the importance it gives to the private sector, and how it should not be only the partnership among African countries on the public level or the government's level, but the public sector in all these countries should have even the lion's share when it comes to economic development, because simply no economy can rise or can develop without this huge participation of the private sector. How do you see this also, sir?
Very true, and I think there were a lot of claims that the Egyptian economy is tilting towards the government ownership, which is not, might be real in numbers, but if we put it in the current context, at the time that things were very difficult in Egypt, and at the time where the Egyptian economy was not attractive for any investment, we understand why somehow Egypt had tilted a little bit towards the public sector. And if we go through what President Sisi has issued in his appointment letter to the new government, one of the key points he mentioned very clearly is to focus on the economic development and enable and empower the private sector and the businessmen to invest and grow their part of the economy and reduce the role of the government in non-strategic sectors. And I think this has been announced by His Excellency the Prime Minister in his presentation to his plan to the Egyptian Parliament a couple of days ago.
And to depend on local components. To depend on local components and to give incentives to the private sector or the businessmen or the men of industry in the private sector to use from 60 even to 70% of local components. And if we implement that on the ground among our African states, I think it's going to be a win-win situation. True?
It's not that simple. Directionally it is right, but local components are quite often also manufactured components. And this is what we mean by depth of industry and the vertical integration of industrial activities. Because we need to go back and have a factory that makes the thing that goes into another factory that makes the thing that goes into a third factory. So this is what we call vertical integration. And if we don't have these basic factories, one level, second level, third level, and we continue to maintain a type of industry that is basically an assembly, we will never reach that. So the idea is, how can we have a deeper industry? And if we take Japan, it's the best example ever, actually, because Japan, after the Second World War, it was totally destroyed, and Japan until today has very, very little natural resources. At the certain point in time, Japan became the global leader in car manufacturing, and that was not because that they had natural resources that nobody else had. That was because the way they structured and introduced new concepts in manufacturing that led them to the leadership position. So again, it's about the approach and the strategies that we need to use to manage our industry and our manufacturing operations.
Amen to that. Right after the short break, we are going to return back to continue the exciting discussion, so stay tuned. Welcome back, and as we promised in our intro, we're going to shed more light together on the Prime Minister's, let's say, statements in front of the House of Representatives focusing on economic development. What are the most important challenges facing the new cabinet, and what are the most important elements of Egypt Vision Egypt 2030? Sir, I'm going to just mention some of the points which were unveiled by Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouli in front of the House of Representatives, when, for example, he said that the primary objective of the government is to achieve a 4.2% growth rate in the first year by attracting new investments and supporting economic progress. Before going into the details, how do you see the number 4.2? Ambitious or accepted, or it's only a first step in a very long journey? How can you describe the number?
It's a stretch, so it's ambitious enough, yet I think it's very achievable. But I think what he also mentioned in his speech, which I think for the common Egyptian would probably be a higher priority than the 4.2, is the inflation or the control of inflation. The head of the Egyptian Central Bank had mentioned in a couple of 2 or 3 months ago, if I'm not mistaken, that his target is to keep the inflation at a single digit, which means basically the way he defined it, 7 plus 2 or minus 2, so say up to 9%. Today, as per the government, we are at 27%. The inflation is what hurts the common Egyptian in his daily life more than the growth. So whereas the growth in the economy is extremely important, but I'm sure that most Egyptians would like to see a lower inflation, even if they did not articulate the term in the same, using the same words, but to see the prices not going up as fast as they are today. I think this would be the first priority. And His Excellency, in his speech to the Parliament, he has actually touched base on this, and he has promised that he will work hard with his cabinet to deliver or to control the prices, which means controlling the inflation. So I think this is the highest priority that the common Egyptians would have.
Also, a significant aspect of the strategy involves a 15% increase in export growth. Simply, money means business. We are talking in number and statistics, and because of that, I intend to use numbers and to use the numbers which were said in this statement. 15% increase in export growth. Also achievable?
It is a modest, I think, not aggressive enough target. If we look at countries like our number in the exports is hardly touching about 40 billion US. Most of them, or a large part of them, is agricultural products. So if we look at countries like Turkey, and we find that Turkey exports are about 400 billion US. So as much as I love the country, or because I love the country so much, I think 15% over 40 is not aggressive enough. I would have opted for a larger number. And again, today we have all the reasons to be a hub, whether for Europe or for Africa.
Because in which field?
Almost in all fields, in anything that we produce in Egypt. After we have reduced the value of the Egyptian pound as a currency, our cost became extremely competitive. So any factory in Europe has 100 reasons why he should ship his machines, come install them somewhere here, and start to produce out of Egypt. So,
as a gate to Africa, as a gate
both
to
ways,
the
both ways. This is the very unique position that Egypt has, that it's actually a gate north to Europe and south to Africa. If we look at, again, we're not imagining things that are impossible. If we look at China, again, China actually, if we take very advanced products, because many people would say Chinese products are, if we take the...
No, it's the grades, it's the grades. I mean, going from 100% to 1%. I mean, this is the way they are dealing with things. If you want something cheap, you are going to find something cheap. If you want to have something luxurious, you are going to find something luxurious.
Very true.
This is
something like the most advanced product that is almost everywhere in the world, or at least they're in the hands of millions of people, if not billions, is the iPhone. iPhone is produced 100% almost in China. Okay, why isn't it produced in Egypt? We can produce it in Egypt. When Apple first went to China, Chinese did not have that technology. Apple introduced it. Okay, there is nothing that prevents us from replicating that model. I'm using this as an example. There are like 100 other things that we can produce in Egypt. Okay, so I think we need to be much more aggressive. Yet I like very much the word that was given by the Minister of Industry and Transportation, and it was actually
Kamel Wazir?
Yes, which was not very well understood by many people when he said we're going to be manufacturing US dollars. Actually, this is what it is. We are spending too much foreign currency to import products almost in so many different fields. If we were to produce these locally, we will reduce tremendously the amount of product that we import, which will result in a better balance of trade, which will put the currency, the local currency, under much less pressure because you don't require so much foreign currency. And the more we evolve and develop our industries, our productions, the more we will be able to export. And actually, instead of us importing, we were going to export. So instead of us needing $10 to export something, we will actually be receiving $10 to if we export this thing, which actually will make a differential of 20. It's twice as much. This is huge. This is what the Egyptian economy needs. It needs a deeper and a very aggressive plan, especially on export, especially on the industries. And if we're talking about export, whether it's not just the production or the manufacturing, but also very much the tourism, which is actually a service being exported. His Excellency talked about targeting 30 million tourists in 2026. And again, I think it's a fair target, yet again, out of my love for the country, when I see a country like Thailand, which doesn't have 1/10 what Egypt has, and is actually having about over 40 million tourists per year. So fine, if we can make 30 million tourists in 26, then hopefully this will be a new platform that will help us get to a larger number down the road. Fine, we need to walk before we run. I fully understand that. The 15.
And we do have numbers when it comes to the hotel rooms we have, to the number of airports, to our homework, which should be done on the ground before being able to receive much more tourists coming from all over the world.
We need to have the infrastructure of that industry built in place. Yes, very true. Do we have it? Are we using and utilizing what we have efficiently? That's still to be seen. But definitely, yes, we need an improvement in many angles to build a full infrastructure. And one thing that I said in several different discussions, there are other tourism but the 5-star tourism.
Sure.
And that is probably the area that we need to grow most in. The 3-star tourism in Egypt is very minimal. We need to think to grow for the youth, for the middle classes, because until today we are mostly a destination for the rich. We need to think of young people, of students, that they can come to Egypt and enjoy the country. Doesn't have to be the most luxurious thing, but what delivers what they need. And I think we've learned a little bit in that direction from our experience in Sharm el-Sheikh and Sinai. We just need to duplicate this and make it a little bit, roll it out and make it a little bit wider.
And not to depend on our high season in the winter. I think what we are doing these days, even in Al Alamein festival, to attract more of our Arab guests coming from all over the Arab country to enjoy our weather here and to enjoy concerts and cultural, artistic concerts and sports events even. I think now we are not only depending on our season from September to February. I think now the case is a little bit different and we're thinking out of the box.
We're actually, I totally agree, and I think actually we're a little bit late. I was privileged. I lived for 13 years in Algeria and in Tunisia. And in these countries, people live the life of these countries is actually in the continuity of our north coast. So there is no reason why a place like Al Alamein or the north coast should be a seasonal place. That should be year-round place. It rains a little bit in winter, fine, be it. Algeria is very mountainous and it rains extremely strong in winter months, yet it is the capital, yet it is all the major cities are on the coastline. There is no reason why our coastline should not be the next or the extension of the next inhabited part of Egypt.
Anyways, I think from a day to another we are going to think out of the box, and the key word here is sustainability, competitiveness, and to depend on our innovation more than anything else. And here my last question, sir, is about the SMEs, because I cannot keep speaking about the SMEs. When it comes to any economy, it cannot depend only on the mega national projects. Of course, we do agree on their importance, but to have the SMEs as a real partner in developing our economy, I think it's something which we should shed more light on.
I totally agree with you. Even the largest economies in the world, the two largest economies in the world, depending how you look at it, but it's interchangeable between China and the US. The core of the American economy is not the big multinationals. It is the SMEs. It is the small and medium enterprises. And that is what drives the economy. And it is because of this that the interest rate is very important, then the inflation rate is very important, then the employment rate is very important. All of these are economic KPIs that are extremely important. In Egypt, we have a way to go in that direction, and I think again it's one of the pillars or the dimensions that His Excellency the Prime Minister has mentioned in his speech, that he wants to motivate and to encourage the small and medium enterprises to grow. And to be fair, previously there were several initiatives that kind of induced by giving favorable rates for small and medium enterprises in terms of borrowing and tax holidays and what have you. Yet I think we need a little bit more to encourage this segment of the economy. It's extremely important, and this is the backbone of any large economy, no matter how large it is.
Amen to that. Well, Dr. Ahmed El-Laythi Nazif, international consultant in strategic management and a writer, thank you very much for your input, sir. I really enjoyed our discussion, and I'm going to leave you with a promise to see you again in more episodes of our program.
You're most welcome. Likewise.
Well, now it's time to have a quick look at the most important economic events which took place in the past 7 days. Till we meet again same time on Nile TV International. Many thanks for watching. This was Nermeen Abdurrahman.